This debate is a bit confounding to me, because it seems that those who are opposed to this measure will reach for whatever they could hold on to argue against it. It's a bit like Yogi Berra saying it's deja vu all over again. Many of the sources cited in opposition to this that have negative projections for what would happen if this bill passes have never thought that it was the appropriate time to raise minimum wage. There are some who've thought that at some points in an economic recovery it made sense and at other points it didn't. And in fact, this House has looked at the notion of increasing the minimum wage several times over the last couple of years. And during the worst moments of the economic recession, we didn't move forward on the course because we were, in fact, in a much worse economic position, and we did, in fact, have higher rates of unemployment. We are in recovery, and this is a different time. If the opponents of the bill would cite sources that have indicated support at some points in an economic cycle in opposition at other points, I think that I would give them greater levels of credibility than citing sources that have always opposed an increase. Now, let's talk about the recovery. In the last year, California has grown some 1 million jobs. Our revenue is coming in faster than all but one other state. We are growing jobs faster than any other state. And our recovery is happening faster than 44 other states. My colleague from the East Bay talked about the dynamics in Oregon and Washington and the fact that Oregon and Washington have higher minimum wages than does California. Guess what? Oregon and Washington are ahead of us. They're amongst the states that are recovering faster than us. Indicates that the argument that the higher minimum wage rate at this point would not be an impediment, because in fact the two states in closest proximity to us that are growing faster than us have a higher minimum wage than us. When you look at the other states that are growing faster than us, they're growing in areas that also pay significantly above the minimum wage. So many of the arguments made against this really fail to understand the dynamics that are happening in the broader world. I take this seriously because I did look very seriously at when these other proposals for minimum wages were before us. And earlier this year, before this bill left our House, I met with many in the business community who had concerns. And they said that their concern was the notion of indexing and that they needed a greater degree of predictability. This bill does that. Instead of indexing, it actually has specific numbers at specific points in time that one can point to, prepare for, and plan for. So it addresses that concern raised. But the other question is really what would happen in an indexed world. You heard two different views of what would have happened if we had pegged the base year at different points. In recent days, we were on this floor commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, and as I prepared for each of you a document that had the demands of that march, and one of the demands was the creation of a minimum wage that allowed for a family to sustain itself. And the reference in the document then was that current, 1963 current, figures would peg that at $2 an hour. If you adjusted for inflation, we'd be at between $14 and $15 an hour. This bill is a modest down payment that is predictable and that makes huge differences in the lives of those who would get the increase. And it is easy for people in this room who make $90,000 a year plus to discount the difference in the lives of people who are struggling to get by on minimum wage.